Hey guys, Dean here. Today we're going to be talking about 5 different books which changed my life. Basically 5 books which I read, which I found super interesting and absorbed a lot of information from. Most of these books are in the whole self-help and personal development genre, so if that interests you, then maybe this video might be useful. Also, I'm going to give a tiny little bit of a synopsis and review of each book in a very short and concise manner. So think of it kind of like a summary of the book, what it is and why it was helpful to me. And also I'll include links in the description below of how you can actually buy the books, which will be affiliate links which will personally help me if you purchase through them. So let's begin. So the first book is probably the most popular book in the whole self-development scene, and that's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Now everyone reveres this book and says that it's amazing, and so many people have read it, right? So my review is basically this is a self-help book for social studies, and it's really useful to read, especially for young people when you go through the adolescent shy phase, which I personally went through too. It was really helpful to read for me. This really helped me in terms of confidence in social situations, and it's very useful, although some of it does have very basic knowledge which is kind of obvious, but some of it can be particularly useful. Of course, when you read these kind of books, you're never actually going to find every single tip useful in them, and a lot of it you might have already know. So it's important to take some of the tips in this book with a grain of salt, for an example, because one thing which a lot of people point out about this particular book is the way in which you're told to kind of interact with people. It almost makes you a very agreeable person, and you need to kind of be aware of this in conversations because you do need to also have your own opinions. It's not all about just being likable. So that's one thing to take away from this book, because if you do follow all the steps in it to a T, then you'll just be more of an agreeable yes man rather than having your own opinion on things. It's good to kind of take a few tips and apply them in certain situations instead of just being a robot and just rehearsing them word for word. Remember obviously to not take everything at face value when you read a book like this and just apply it all completely, because it just doesn't really work in real life situations. Remember, just being an agreeable person isn't good, because you still need to have certain boundaries in different relationships and in the way that you carry yourself, and you still need to call people out on bad behavior, for an example, which is something which this book doesn't really teach you how to do. But in terms of just managing friendships and navigating social scenarios, it can be a really useful book. Now, to take advantage of this book and all of its tips, you still need to have some kind of sense of judge of character and to kind of get to know how people really are before you continue to decide to keep interacting with them, because that's not really something that this book seems to cover. So obviously using the tips from the book can be really beneficial, and there's a lot of helpful knowledge in there. One thing I would say that some people kind of tend not to do though is to not be themselves. You still need to kind of be entirely yourself and not fake, and remember to also still retain some kind of backbone so people do take you seriously, because it's only going to work for a certain period if you're just being agreeable with people to make them like you. So a lot of these tips can be useful, but you need to kind of blend that into your own self and personality. But overall, I found the book a really good read. This also goes hand in hand with the fact that I think 90% of this book is really great material, especially for young people trying to learn and navigate these kind of situations. But I would also avoid the flattery part in the book, because like I said before, a lot of the advice tells you to do certain things in order to be likable, and some of those are more flattery type things, and you don't want to overwhelm people by just flattering them and giving them too many compliments, for an example. The next book is How to Be a 3% Man by Corey Wayne. So I don't really usually read these types of books, but I decided to jump into it in the deep end and just use it to see if it would give me some constructive advice which I could use in the future. Now, like I said before, my usual type of book is anything that's self-development. This book mainly shifts towards the whole dating side, which is not my usual genre, but I really enjoyed it, and it actually surprisingly gave me some really good tips to use. This is why I would recommend it, and I think every man should read this book. It's a really good read, and when you first look at the book and look at the cover, it kind of looks like some kind of cheap book, but when you read it has surprisingly really good material in it. If you want to have greater success in not just the dating space but in other areas of life, I think this book is a really useful tool to use. Now, the difference between this particular book is the author, Corey Wayne, he basically uses real life and real world examples from his own personal experiences. So that's what I really liked about this book that made it different to a lot of the other books. The reason why I usually stay away from these kind of books which are in the whole dating niche, etc., is it's always these pickup artists or people who regurgitate regurgitate information which doesn't actually work. But the fundamentals in this book have actually been tried and tested by the author, and you can tell from his actual material that he's definitely genuinely honest about it. I realized how a lot of the advice in the book in relation to my own mistakes or failures were also true, and applying it in correspondence to the highest success rate was also the same too. So this book actually does work. Basically, the whole consensus about this book is to gauge a woman's interest in you. So you basically see what kind of percentage they have the interest in you to see if there's any potential or worth following up in the interaction further, or just letting go and leaving it, for an example, which is actually pretty useful and something that a lot of people ignore. This is very useful to have as a read, mainly just to learn more about the psychological behavior of women in comparison to men in order to understand them more, because obviously the two different genders think a lot differently and they act a lot differently, and both sides don't really know what the other is thinking. So it's a pretty interesting read, mainly for that circumstance. The idea of the book is to basically kind of reprogram some of your behaviors which aren't really desirable. So for an example, if people are being needy or clingy, you kind of need to reprogram that because it's not going to work for you in the long run. And it helps to change some of your certain social habits and dynamics which are just making things not work for you. So this was a really good read for those kind of tips. Now, it doesn't use any games or false tricks or manipulation to get where you want. It basically teaches you real game whilst remaining completely authentic with people, which is what you want to do. You don't want to use any kind of dark tricks or methods because it's just really dishonest. It basically helps to identify your own personal mistakes and blunders in the past and how you can improve and learn from them. I would really recommend this book, and I think it's genuinely a really good read. The next book is The 48 Laws of Power, which you've probably also heard of as well. So this is an extremely interesting read, and I haven't actually finished this book yet, but I've read the majority of it. I'm very close to finishing it, but it was so good that I almost feel like I can already recommend it, right? So this is very thought-provoking as a book and interesting, and it kind of takes you for a wild ride through exciting, shocking, and depressing themes. So you kind of have a roller coaster of ups and downs through reading this book, which makes it pretty gripping. And it bases all the examples on real-world history to actually explain its points a little bit more in detail, which makes it easy to understand. It does kind of go through a crawl on very deep, long stories, which can be a little bit of a long-winded read, which made me put down the book a few times, but all in all, it was very interesting, and I like how the author did this. This is seen as a great book, but it's also seen as an evil book by many, and you're probably going to realize why in a few moments. The reason being is you're probably going to lose your innocence as a good person reading this book, and the reason why is because you're going to learn about manipulation and tactics used by other individuals in life to get ahead. Now, if you're like me and you've been raised as a good person with morals and taught to always be good to others, reading this book is kind of going to open your mind and realize what other people do and how people are different to you, okay? Basically, you realize past experiences and how people really are, and you also realize that some people are genuinely actually out to get you and are there to manipulate you to achieve their end goals, and they don't really care about stepping on you in the process to do so. And this is kind of a shot in the foot, but it's a wake-up call for many people who kind of live life in an innocence bubble and don't realize what's going on around them. So that's what makes this a really good read. Now, it's interesting because as you read, you'll actually discover certain people in your life in the past or past experiences may have actually used some of these tricks to actually trick you or to manipulate you in some way to get what they wanted. And you'll realize you had no clue when you're in the moment, but when you read this book, it's kind of almost like a wake-up call, right? So it's a really interesting book to read. And learning about this book, it really helps you to kind of be a better judge of character in social scenarios and to kind of distance yourself from these people and avoid them. And depending what kind of person you are, you could also use some of these tricks against them, but I don't really advise that because I don't really think it makes you a good person, and that's the kind of reason why this book could perhaps be dangerous if you're using it to teach yourself those methods. Now, some rules in this book are actually very smart. For an example, being careful what you say to other people and not telling people your future plans or goals, which could be used against you, not sharing or oversharing secrets which people may not actually keep, and not to always reveal your plans, or also not trying to act smarter than other people because nobody likes someone who's big-headed, right? And these are just pretty much good laws to follow if you don't want to be seen as a bad person, and also not have your ideas stolen, for an example, which in professionalism like work and business is a really big one. For an example, on YouTube, I've experienced a lot of people kind of pinch and take ideas, and it's something which you don't really want to overshare, especially when you're working on a video in the YouTube space, for me, for an example, you don't want to share the idea until it's actually released, right? Because otherwise someone might beat you to it first, which can always be a little bit disappointing. I feel like everyone does need to read this book though as an essential read for their own life, basically to avoid people who are charlatans and swindlers who will basically take advantage of you in every walk of life, and also just to learn about general self-preservation, right? This can be done in a positive way without using the dark lessons for your own means, but being aware of other people using them on you. So some people will use this book to manipulate others and they'll learn the lessons and then apply them, but some people like me want to read the book to realize other people actually using them or doing it, and realize how we can distance ourselves from them and basically self-preserve ourselves without being wronged in the process, right? So that's why I think this is a really good book. And I don't think the author published this book for people to be malicious with it, but almost to kind of wake people up to know what's going on around them. Then the next book is How to Instantly Connect with Anyone. So this is another social dynamics book with both common and some useful tips. It contains some useful tips on kindling basic conversations, which is quite good too. It's useful mainly in my opinion for the validation of one's own preconceived perceptions of social dynamics and connection with people and what you're supposed to do in these scenarios, because most people, like I said before, know exactly what they need to do, but reading a book like this can be good to validate your own thoughts, right? So this is a very useful book for dealing with people. Mainly in my opinion, I think this book would really benefit people in more professional work-based situations rather than normal social climates, but it's a pretty interesting book which can be useful nonetheless. This can kind of help you not to offend people and have general good etiquette during interactions. Now, not all 96 tips in this book are useful, but most are explained with anecdotes to back them up, which makes them easy to understand. And the fifth and last book which I'm going to cover is The Art of People. Now, I particularly like this book, and I also think the author is a good author too, and I'll explain why in a few moments. So I like this book, and I found it kind of to be a modern day take on how to win friends and influence people, which I mentioned first, right? And it's inspired by similar themes of interaction with people, which you'll see has kind of been a progressive theme on this list. This book is very useful for people who are more business orientated, like the last one. It's the same kind of situation here. And the reason being for this is it's based off of real life experiences of the author himself running a successful business. And it's really interesting to see how he ran this business and grew it, and how he interacted with all his employees and made them feel safe and productive in the workspace. The author also likes to respond to many reviews on his book too on the website Goodreads, which I personally think is just admirable that he's interacting with the readers. The book is, in my opinion, it's written in a friendly and a conversational way which can appeal to most people. This book is generally just good for reading people and connecting with them, resolving conflict between others, and inspiring and leading them. I think it's useful for natural born leaders or new team leaders in a professional work climate who want to know how they can manage a team or group of people effectively in order to promote the whole work ethic in a professional business. So I think that's where this book can be really useful, and anyone who's an entrepreneur or possible potential business owner or someone who works in a professional climate can find this book really productive. So that's been my top 5 books that changed my life or that I found super useful. I will link all these books in the description down below straight to Amazon so you can go ahead and download them, and if you want to listen to them because you don't like physical books, you can also click the link down below too for my 30-day trial on Audible, where you can get 2 free audiobooks if you use my link, and maybe you can get one of the ones which I recommended and tell me what you thought of it. Let me know if you've read these books and what you thought of them in the comments below, and also tell me in the comments of any other useful books which either changed your life or that you really enjoyed reading for any kind of particular reason. It doesn't matter what it is. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.